Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight at the Munk School of Global Affairs. It's kind of our home away from home at TVO. The last Thursday of every month, we come here and do a special broadcast on some foreign affairs-related issue. Tonight, we want to remind you that we are live streaming this program on our homepage. That's tvo.org/theagenda. You can also watch us on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/theagenda. Also, I want to remind you that there are a number of ways that you can participate in tonight's program. Our fifth column blogger, Mike Miner, is hosting an online chat that's on our Inside Agenda Producers blog at tvo.org/theagenda. Or you can also send us a tweet. Go to twitter.com, #YourAgenda, and tell us what you think of tonight's topic. Want to remind you as well that after we're finished on television at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, flip on over to the web because we will do a post-program web chat. Our guests will stick around for another 15 or 20 minutes or so, and you can put your comments, your questions to our guests on tonight's topic as to whether or not Canada is as welcoming a nation as we have traditionally thought it was. Now, let's introduce our guests. Joining us tonight, Avi Go. She is an immigration lawyer who immigrated to Canada in 1982. Stephen Green, senior partner at Green & Spiegel, LLP. He's a past chair of the Canadian Bar Association, Citizenship and Immigration Section. Mehdi Rizvi, former member of the Community Editorial Board of the Toronto Star. He is a chemist who immigrated to Canada in 1999. And beside him, Margaret Coppola, president of the Centre for Immigration Policy Reform. Good of all of you to join us tonight. And Margaret, particularly coming all the way in from Ottawa. It's nice to have you all with us this evening. Our packaging director, David Irwin, went to the streets of Hamilton and Toronto earlier this week to get some opinions on the street as to what people thought about this country and immigrants and whether we're as welcoming a country as we have thought of ourselves. And we're going to play some tape of that first, and then we'll come back and chat, okay? Michael, if you would, roll tape.
They're letting too many people in. It's like, I feel like I'm the minority now. And they're taking all our jobs away.
We are getting a lot of people who are immigrating that are very skilled, highly skilled, and they can contribute a great deal to our country.
The new immigrants, they come in, they affect the country, they come in here and you don't work, they collect the welfare.
This whole country owes our lifeblood and wealth to the hard work of immigrants.
Immigration is okay as long as people are willing to work when they come into this country. But if they're going to live on our tax money that we've paid into for 40, 50 years, then it should go to the Canadians and the Canadians only.
Okay, that's a cross-section of opinions that David Irwin got in the streets of Toronto and Hamilton earlier this week. And I want to start tonight's broadcast by asking our guests about a comment made by Vic Tabes, the public safety minister, earlier this week, where he said, "I see a hardening of the attitude of many Canadians in respect to the immigration system." Stephen, get us started tonight. Do you agree with the minister's comments?
I don't agree with the minister's comments. I think that the minister made those comments to perhaps help him get his bill through dealing with smuggling and things like that. Immigration is a very political issue, and it gets to the heart of many of us, and perhaps it helps legislation get through, and I don't know if he really knows all the facts with respect to making a statement like that.
You're suggesting that there may have been some politics underlying his statement, which is natural. He's a politician. But speak to the actual point he's trying to make, which is that he sees, and polls pick up, a hardening of attitudes towards immigrants nowadays.
Well, what I've seen in my office is no, I don't see that. I see people calling us saying we need more people to help us in our businesses. We want to be with our family members, bring them in. So I don't know if that's a correct statement. I don't agree with it.
Okay. You want me to call you Rizvi tonight, even though that's your last name. Yes. So just so people don't think I'm being rude.
Right.
Rizvi, what do you think about the minister's comments?
No, it is a political statement, but the fact is that it is a matter of sharing resources. And there is a little factor of fear of the foreign also, right? Suppose we have 4 persons here and we have 4 bread. It goes fine. Tomorrow we get 2, so there will be a little stress. Next day we get 1. Then the stress level will go up and the tolerance level will come down. And with that, there is another thing. The feelings or the differences of faith, face and race, they will be more visible. It is not now in Canada, it is a very clean society, but it may happen in some near future.
Okay. Avi, what's your view?
Well, I think interestingly, the first interview that you did on the street, well, I have to say that, all of them are white people. Like, in Toronto these days, half of us half of the population are people of color now, so it's interesting.
Can I just say for the record, I'm sure David interviewed people, so-called
Yeah.
people of color. There were people with accents who were also interviewed.
Right, yeah, I understand.
And some of their
So-
comments were quite interesting, actually. But
Right.
go ahead.
And the first comment was made of immigrants coming here to take our jobs away. So I think it's very typical of the the anti-immigrant sentiment that we have seen over the years. It's not just right now. Canada has always had a very uneasy kind of relationship with immigration.
Is it worse now?
I'm not sure if it's worse because we have seen very bad times in our history when we had openly racist policies, right? But at the same time, like I tend to agree with Steve in the sense that the backlash, if there is backlash, if it's created by the arrival of the Tamil refugees and all that, in part it is because of comments made by some of our cabinet ministers. Before they even arrived, we were told that the refugees are bringing disease, which turned out not to be true. And then we were told that maybe there are terrorists in there. They all have to be detained. I'm not sure how many terrorists they have discovered of that group.
So politicians are spooking people, you think?
I think so. I mean,
okay. Let me get Margaret
yeah.
on this. Margaret, what's your view on the comment?
Well, I don't know about hardening, but concern definitely, and I think it was demonstrated in the comments in the interviews here. And frankly, they touched, I think, on a lot of the important issues. I see the concerns lining up in two areas. One is in costs, numbers and costs, and the other is in sovereignty and security. We have almost 500,000 people, newcomers arriving in this country every year, half of which come through the immigration and refugee channels, the other half of which are temporary workers. Most of them descend on our major cities, where they are accessing huge amounts of physical and social infrastructure, our roads, our schools, our healthcare system, our housing, where many of us are pleased to see the prices of our housing going up. But at the same time, there's a danger of bubbles, and our own young people are being priced out of the market. Now, there was a time when immigrants arrived in this country, and within 10 years, they were paying their own way. That is no longer true.
Stephen, is that right? They're not paying their own way after 10 years now?
No, I don't agree with that. With all respect to Margaret, these people are coming here creating jobs. This old story of increasing the housing prices, I mean, they talked about that in Australia. They're creating jobs. They're coming here. They're buying our homes. They're giving Canadians, permanent residents, jobs, labor, and they're contributing to our society. They're doctors that are coming in, fellows that work at our hospitals. They run our hospitals, these fellows. If we didn't have these people coming in, our medical system would fall apart. So with all respect, no, these people are helping us tremendously. And if we didn't have them, we'd be in big trouble.
Margaret, come on back.
Two interesting studies in this area. One published in 2005, which demonstrated that immigrants are now accessing around $20 billion worth of services in excess of the taxes they are paying. And if you think that that sounds far-fetched, in 2008, the Ontario Association of Food Banks published a study saying that recent immigrants were costing Ontario $6 billion in poverty costs.
We're actually going to spend some of our time over the course of the hour finding out why that is the case, whether that's
exactly.
their fault or our fault, those of us who've lived here for a while. So we'll look into that. Avi, I want to try this with you, because I know this did not escape your attention during the mayoralty campaign last year that we've all gone through here in Ontario's capital city. When he was candidate Rob Ford, as opposed to now Mayor Rob Ford, he said, "Right now, we can't even deal with the 2.5 million people in this city. I think it's more important to take care of the people now before we start bringing in more people." And public opinion surveys later showed that he had a massive lead even among voters born outside Canada. And we saw it in the opening clips of the program too. People with accents saying, okay to immigration, but what does this say about how established immigrants feel about newer immigrants?
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that is sometimes the sentiment I've seen from some of my clients as well. Like, and particularly in economic hard time, we tend to look inward and we tend to try to find somebody else to blame. And immigrants are always an easy target to blame. When we lose our job, then it's their fault that we lose our job. Or when when the government is running a deficit, then it must be them who is like causing the deficit. And I think it's really important. That's why public discourse with real facts has to happen. So, for instance, I, for one, I know that I have to rely on immigrants to pay for my pension when I retire because Canadians are not having babies. The population is aging. Every new entrant in the labor force by a couple of years from now will be an immigrant. If we don't let them in, nobody's going to work to pay for my pension or whatever it is that I need in the future.
What does it say when even relatively new immigrants are looking over at even newer immigrants and saying that's a problem?
I wrote an article in response to his statement, not wanted in Toronto. But there is a basic question regarding immigration that first thing is that why do we bring immigrants? What is the reason? Why do we need them? Do we need them to increase our population? Do we need them to utilize their skills, their education, their competence to enrich our knowledge economy? Or do we need cheap, educated, I will repeat, do we need cheap, educated laborers to keep our factories running with their crushed egos, destroyed careers, and shattered dreams?
I'm assuming you're saying yes, yes, and yes.
No, what is that? I mean, why do we bring them? What is the idea?
Well, you've given 3 areas for 3 reasons why we bring people in, and I presume
these are not the reasons. These are the questions I have raised. Why do we bring them? That is the first question. And the other question is that what it means to be Canadian. Who is Canadian? I came 10 years back, she came 20 years. Some of them came 100 years back. There were waves of immigrants from Europe after World War I and World War II. Who is native Canadian?
Okay, that's another program. We're going to do that later in this series. Tonight we're going to stick to this one. But that's it. Margaret, how would you explain the notion that new immigrants find even newer immigrants to be a problem?
I think their instincts are spot on. Every immigrant is in competition with another immigrant for a job. And what we have to understand is that wealth, to have a healthy economy, you don't have to have a large economy. To have a healthy economy, what you have to have are good productivity levels. Canada has amongst the lowest productivity levels in the OECD. The reason for that? Cheap labor. Instead of our industry making the kind of investments in capital goods that would produce the kind of productivity that is needed, we are piling in a lot of cheap labor. What happens when you bring in cheap labor? You get everybody's wages are pulled down. You might get a larger economy, but everybody's individual standard of living will be much lower. We need to be concerned.
Stephen?
Well, I don't believe we're bringing in cheap labor. From the temporary side of the process, it's extremely difficult to bring in a foreign worker. They have to meet by law the labor standards in Canada. They have to be paid the same as you and I would be for doing that job. And it's important, I think, to make distinctions here between family immigration, refugee immigration, skilled worker immigration, and business immigration. And each one has to be looked at differently, and how do they contribute, and what are perhaps the problems in each category. We seem to mush everybody together, and you shouldn't do that.
Yes, I'd agree absolutely on this one. One of the great foggy areas in immigration is a failure to understand exactly who is here and why they are here. So the statistics here are really very telling. Only 17% of immigrants who arrive in Canada actually meet any kind of selection criteria. That is, they have language skills and that they have job skills, which gives them obviously a leg up in gaining employment here. Other problems around there.
Family unification is obviously a big reason as well.
The next area is refugees. I think there are about 13% of those. The other productive class, as it were, is the business class and live-in caregivers. They come here with a specific task or work to do. The rest, there's 35% who then arrive here as dependents of all the above. And then finally, there is the class called family class, which I personally believe is a misnomer. It should be extended family class. These are people who come here as sponsored immigrants, usually the parents of people who are already here. And once those parents are here, once those sponsored immigrants are here, they then are able to sponsor other immigrants who then can sponsor other immigrants.
Is that a problem?
Hence we get this phenomenon, yes, because these people are here for no other reason except that they are somebody's relative.
Avi.
I happen to be one of those people who came as a family class sponsored immigrant. And in fact, the majority of the family members in my family came as family class immigrants. My brother came first in the late 60s as a student, and eventually the family moved here over a different period of time. And so I do see the value of having family here, and I think I would contribute my own success to the fact that my whole family is in North America. And it's really unfortunate that we have cut down family class from, back in the days, it used to be like more than 50% of all the immigrants coming in were family class members. Now it's like, what, 22%? In fact, I think that is creating a problem for many immigrants here, whether they came as business or independent class or refugees or whatever. The fact that they are not able to bring their family over is having a negative impact on their ability to integrate and adjust.
Let me get Steve and Margaret again.
See, the problem here and the big question is, what balance do we want to have as Canadians? Do we want it all family? I mean, do we want to say, Steve, you can't bring your mother here. You can't bring your father here. Or do we want to say, you can't bring your mother and father here, but we're going to bring in this worker. We're going to bring in this business person. And that's the big question that all of us have to decide. And the government nowadays tries to make that balance. And Margaret may feel there's too much family coming in. She may not get the calls from people that are saying, my parents are waiting 7 years to come to Canada. And if you ask most MPs what their biggest question is, and the most calls they get, I can't bring my parents here.
Right.
And some people would say, well, they're older, they may use our OHIP system more than others, but they also bring money, they help my family, they maybe let me go to work. So that's the big question. Where do we make that balance?
Margaret?
I think it's important to make a very clear distinction between those relatives who come in, the spouses, the nuclear family. Nuclear families arrive here automatically when they come in with a worker. They come in under the economic class, okay? The nuclear family is already here. Family reunification is intact and is encouraged. Let's make no mistake about that, and that's a good thing. We make investments in their children because they will grow up to be good citizens. Family class is all the rest. And I think what we so often forget in this country, while we're so busy being so magnanimous about this, is that this country was built by people who made precisely those sacrifices. They left extended family behind. Not only did they leave them behind, but they might never see them again. They didn't have email. They didn't have internet. They couldn't fly back 2 times a year. And now, you can imagine, it's not surprising that there would be a little bit of a, what's going on here, when everybody expects that it should be an automatic entitlement that they bring over.
Do you want to return to the days where husband came over first, sent for wife 5 or 10 years later, and then,
No. Australia has a very good approach on this one. What they do is they insist that a critical mass of the siblings are in the country first and have met all the various qualifications before bringing in parents.
Okay, we've been looking at one side of the equation, and Rizvi, I want to ask you about the other side of the equation. You're a chemist. You could have plied your trade back in the country you came from, which is?
I am from Pakistan, but I worked in the Middle East in Oman for about 15 years as a quality control chemist.
So if you'd stayed in the Middle East, being a chemist there, can I assume that you would have made a lot more money than if you'd come here?
Definitely, but it depends on your target. What was your aim? What was my aim, I mean? I came here to build a bright future for my children, and I am a successful man now. Now, I have destroyed my career, no doubt. The place I work, excellent. Bosses are good, employer is good, environment is excellent. But the place where I am working now, it is just like an entry-level position. With a 36 years experience as a chemist, I am working on an entry-level position, but I am satisfied, I am happy, I am successful. The reason that I came here to build a bright future for my children.
And are your children getting that chance to have a better future?
Yes, I have 3 children. Two of them have graduated from Schulich School of Business. One has done CA recently, and the third one last year he got an award from the Governor General of Canada for academic excellence.
Congratulations.
So I am a successful father. It doesn't matter what happened to me.
Well, but some people think it does matter what happened to you.
It depends on priorities.
Okay, but when you came here, presumably you wanted to be able to do here what you did back in the Middle
Definitely,
East.
I tried.
And you couldn't?
Yeah, I couldn't.
So this country was not as welcoming as you'd hoped?
Not welcoming, actually. Again, it comes to the policy. It is a matter of demand and supply. There was no demand, and supply was there. There are hundreds and thousands of chemists here.
Stephen, we hear this story all the time, which is that you know, the proverbial, I don't want to say chemist, but whatever, you know, the chemist or engineer or whatever from overseas who comes here and drives a taxi or does a job that is not nearly up to the skills that they believe that they have. Is that our problem here?
Well, I think that problem started because the Canadian government developed a system many years ago where they had a list of occupations, about 1,881 to be exact. And if you were on that list, you came to Canada. And it really did give a false hope to many people. Chemists were on the list, engineers were on the list. And about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, they decided that that was wrong. And what they looked at was something called the human capital model, where we looked at your age, your education. You did have skilled work, and we hoped that you came here. You may not work as a chemist, but we believed you had the right stuff and would find a job. And it was working pretty good, but they got huge amounts of numbers, and they couldn't control it. And the backlogs were huge, 500, 600, 700 waiting. And now what they decided was we're going to go back to the old system of creating a list. So we now have a list of about 29 occupations. It's a little more refined, where we've told people that, you know, you can come as a doctor, for example, doctors on the list. And we try to tell them that it's up to the province if they're going to let you work.
Right.
But no, I think we failed people abroad with that list and giving misinformation. We tried to fix it, and I think we're going back a bit now.
Here's what I'm getting at, because, Michael, let's cue up this clip in the middle of page 4 here, because we did a program about some of the issues related to the themes we're talking about tonight a number of months ago, and we had as one of our guests Mohammed Abdulhadi Mohammed, who is an expert, he's Somali-Canadian, expert on the Somali militant group, Al-Shabaab, and a founder of a group called Generation Islam, which is a new organization that tries to steer young kids away from the path of radicalization. Why are they on that path to radicalization? Because they're in this country and they don't have the opportunities that they feel Canada promised them, and therefore they have become radicalized. Stand by in your response to that. Let's roll that clip and then we'll talk. Roll tape, please.
When a young man plays by the law and achieves something, and he doesn't have any role model or anybody to help him out, to give him to the next stage, and he is very frustrated and angry, and a radical comes to him and say, hey, do you know why you didn't get the job? I was told that. You know why you don't get a job? I have 2 degrees and I'm working security guard. When radicals come to you and say, do you know why? Because your name is Muhammad, you're not wanted, you're Muslim, you will never get a chance in this country. These young men who are unemployed with the university degrees in the mosques or even in the neighborhoods doing nothing, what do? They turn to YouTube and listen to this YouTube and to this propaganda
call
media.
For jihad. Okay, Rizvi, the so-called militants in our midst, do you think that is a phenomenon that is driving Canadians' attitudes about immigration today?
It's a kind of political question. I don't want to answer it. But the truth is, no,
well,
it's
sorry, but we invited you here tonight to answer those kinds of questions.
The truth is, poverty leads to crimes. This is very simple.
Poverty and lack of opportunity leads to this.
That leads to frustration, and then they can go to any way. It is their choice now.
Well, I guess, first of all, we need to understand that, in fact, Canada is becoming a more polarized country in 2 senses. One is that the gap between the rich and the poor is growing. You know, there are, you know, the top, whatever, 10% are making a lot more money today than they were 5 years ago, and the poor are there's a disappearing middle class. But within that, and on top of that, there's also, you know, an issue around who is becoming poor. And it's not just about immigrants. Like, you know, some of the young people that I'm sure he's referring to were not born outside of Canada. They were Canadian-born kids who are not having the opportunity. So we cannot blame the immigration policy for the failure of our economic system that is not addressing the needs of the Canadian-born, particularly, I guess, people of color, I would say. There are studies that shows that, you know, if you're a person of color, you're a male, you have an education, university education, you're more likely than a white male born in Canada to be unemployed, or you make less income. So there's a lot of issues here that is beyond, you know, the conversation we're having today. But at the same time, I also think that besides the immigration issue, we are failing the immigrants because their education, their experience are not being recognized. We don't have provincial employment equity law that will, you know, require employers to make the workplace more representative. So there are more things that we can do to address the immigration issue.
Okay, Margaret, let me get you to speak to this militants in our midst phenomenon, and whether that's affecting immigration attitudes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a huge concern growing around the fact that some of our most cherished institutions, the Charter, multiculturalism, even our free market system, are being used as Trojan horses to admit those who do not have Canada's interests at heart and may even be working for our demise. Okay, set that aside. The young man who just spoke, that speaks very clearly, I believe, to a level of frustration that I'm sure many, many educated immigrants are experiencing. Namely, they come here with qualifications from other countries and they can't find work in their area.
And therefore become quite frustrated.
Frustrated and militant, disaffected, certainly. Huge issues here for social stability and what have you. One of the problems this arises from is the fact that, and what isn't generally appreciated, is that Canada has 4 universities in the top 100 universities in the world. Immigrants China and India produce most of our immigrants. China and India, on the other hand, their universities rank down in the 300 to 500 range. In other words, their qualifications don't come anywhere near to measuring up. Their degrees are nowhere near the equivalent of Canadian degrees.
I understand.
So nobody's telling them that, though, before they come here.
Let me pick up on that with you, Steve. Doctors are coming here expecting to be able to be doctors here, and they're discovering that that's not the case. I want to get a better sense of where the fault lies on this. Are we giving them the expectation that they're going to be able to pick right up from their lives where they came from and become very successful here right away? Or are their expectations of what they're going to have to go through when they come to this country too high?
Well, the federal government, which is responsible for bringing in the people, tries to work with the provinces, which licenses all these doctors. Before a doctor comes to Canada through our immigration system, they must sign a declaration where the federal government tells them, we cannot guarantee that you can operate as a doctor here. And then they come here, and quite candidly, the federal government is not to blame. It's our provincial governments that put up these huge walls for doctors that come here to try to get licensed. Pharmacists is probably the only area that I've seen where there's a wonderful opportunity where the University of Toronto works with newcomers, some of the private sector, and the federal government helps these pharmacists get re-registered and able to work here in about 2 years. So I think a lot of people are aware of the difficulties, and the comments that this gentleman made where, you know, it's the immigrants that can't find jobs and this is going to develop into a terrible thing. I don't think immigration really has anything to do with his statement. I mean, it's really anybody that's here that is in a difficult situation that could fall into that.
Okay, let me pick up on one of the clips from the top of the program as we put it to you. You know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, immigrants would come to Canada and they had no expectation at all of living the same kind of life as somebody who'd been here for decades and decades and decades, right? They knew it was going to be a struggle for many years, and they hoped, I guess, as you did, that their children would experience the better life. Immigrants who come to Canada today, do they expect to live a better life, as good a life, as Canadians who've been here for generations right away?
Yeah, it's very simple. Immigrants and Canadians both, between the age group of 25 to 54. 35% of immigrants, they possess university degrees, whereas 22% of local Canadians possess university degrees. So their expectations must be high.
Are they entitled to those expectations?
Definitely.
Well, you didn't. You didn't feel entitled.
Why I did not? Not entitled. Definitely it is a struggle. We have to work hard to establish ourselves. My first job was at a gas station and I accepted that. That was the reality of time.
Okay, Margaret.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The expectations are extraordinary and completely unrealistic. There was a time, and I think
How do you know that?
Well, there wasn't, because I know how it worked before. I'm a third generation citizen of Polish Ukrainian heritage. My bunch came over here and picked those rocks and cleared that bush. They didn't learn to speak English. The second generation barely got a one-room schoolhouse education. And finally, my generation has managed to sail through and are fully integrated, but it took 3 generations.
I'm not sure people want to wait 3 generations to experience the Canadian
You're
dream
quite
anymore.
right. You're quite right.
Well,
and we don't want them to either. Somehow or other, we expect it, but it's not realistic. You need, things have to, if they're going to work properly, you need an organic process. You've got to be able to.
Are they entitled to experience the Canadian dream in their first, or at worst, second generation, rather than the third?
Not entitled. Certainly not. Again, this country was built by people who made sacrifices. And that has to be respected. I mean, it is an absolute snub, a slap in the face to these people who built this country, to come here thinking that you're going to get every entitlement that's going. And there are immigrants who are doing that, who actually memorized all their entitlements before they come here.
Avi, can you speak to that, about whether or not immigrants who come today have a sense of entitlement that Margaret's generation 2 or 3 ago?
I wish they did, because they wouldn't be coming to me for help with, when they're being exploited by the employers, when they have nowhere to go. And I think a lot of people, like I work with, about 2,500 clients who come to our clinic every year. Many of them would have some kind of degree from China or somewhere else. I think they do have some kind of expectation, in the sense that they know that they have to start at the bottom, but they don't expect to be stuck at the bottom, which is where they are at right now for a long, long time. And I think Margaret pointed out, it used to take maybe about 10 years for them to get to, sort of like the same level as someone who is Canadian born. It's now taking forever. And many of them, while they recognize that they have to come here, they have to start somewhere lower, and they have to sacrifice for the kids, but at the same time, I think they expect to be treated with respect. They expect it to be treated as a human being. They don't expect to experience racism or xenophobia or Islamophobia, whatever it is. And I think that's the expectation that I think we should respect.
Understood. Rizvi?
There is another point. First generation of immigrants, normally they have to give sacrifices for the second generation, that we have seen in the history.
As you did.
Yes. This is a normal process, I think. Whenever we came from India, my parents, they came to Pakistan and they faced a very hard time for their children, but they gave good education to their children. So I think this is the normal way of life for immigrants.
Friends, take a swig of water. I got to do a little business with the folks at home right now. We are discussing at the Munk School for Global Affairs tonight, discussing the question of whether or not we're seeing a backlash against immigrants in Canada right now. I want to remind you that our fifth column blogger, Mike Miner, is moderating an online chat right now on our homepage, tvo.org/theagenda. Just click on that and go to our Inside Agenda blog, and you'll be able to see the chat that Mike is moderating right now. Also want to remind you that at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, after we're finished with the broadcast here at the Munk School, go online to our website, tvo.org/theagenda. You can do that right now. Send us your comments, your questions for our 4 guests who will stick around for 15 or 20 minutes or so and take your questions directly. And that'll be on our website, tvo.org/theagenda, immediately after 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Also want to remind you of one other thing we've got going online tonight, and that is we have videos of 5 recent arrivals to Canada detailing their expectations before they arrived in Canada and the reality of life now that they are here in Canada. And if you go to our homepage, I'll say it again, tvo.org/theagenda, look in the right-hand column and you can click on their pictures and hear them discuss and see them discuss their experiences in this country. Okay, let me flip ahead. Audience warning, I'm coming to you soon. We're going to do some Q&A pretty soon. Just first, Margaret, let's talk about numbers, because I gather the number is about 250,000, right, that we have coming.
People who come through the immigration system.
Right. That represents, if the math is right here, about 0.7% of Canada's population, which is seems like a relatively small number. And yet we hear people saying, we had candidate Ford say it during the Toronto mayoralty race, we got to take care of who's here first before we bring anybody else in. Some people will say 0.7% adding to the population is not a heck of a lot for a country that's already got a pretty small population. What do you say?
We have the highest intake of immigrants, well, pretty near the highest intake of immigrants per capita in the world. The mystery is where these numbers, magic numbers, come from. The best we've been able to come up with at the center is the fact that the Liberals came out with a red paper a few years ago saying, well, 1% of the population, let's aim for 1% of the population as a replacement. There are no formula out there which dictates, say, that you have to have any kind of immigration specific numbers. In fact, there was a time when, you know, we had policies which were manifestly successful based on a simple premise that of what Joe Bissett calls the tap-on, tap-off policy.
What does that mean?
That means you just brought those immigrants in that you needed, when you needed them. And when you didn't need them, you turned the tap off.
Stephen, what do you think of that?
We have a tap system.
Tap on, tap off?
Tap on, tap off. And we've refined it where we look at age, we look at education, and if a person has the right stuff, according to the tap on at that time, they get to come in. If they don't have the right stuff, the tap's off. We have the business. We look at the person's background, their success. We define what the tap is, what the tap isn't. So in Margaret's example, perhaps it was we turn on Niagara Falls and turn off Niagara Falls. We do it a little more gently nowadays. But we do it.
But it still works out to 250,000 people a year.
It does, and it was Margaret's correct, it was the Liberals that said they wanted 1%. We've never been to 1%.
Never got to 1%.
But that was the way they figured it out, that they thought that was best, and the Conservatives have, you know, kept around there.
So Avi, if 1%'s the goal, and we really never hit 1%, can you make a determination as to whether or not that's too high or too low, or is that a good number or a bad number? How do you figure that out?
Yeah, I think that is a good question that I don't think any of us here, with all due respect, know the answer to that question. I only know that we have an aging population. I only know without immigration, our population is declining. So I know that countries, for instance, like Japan, who doesn't want any immigrants, are having a huge problem with not only about how to take care of their elderly, so they have to create robots to do that. They have a bad economy. I think the fact that Canada, in a way, has been less affected by the global recession, not only because we have better banking regulation policy, but because we have a robust immigration policy that keeps the economy going.
Let me put that to Margaret, because you've heard the estimates. They think in the next century in Russia, the population is going to be half as big.
Yes, absolutely.
We need people here to replace ourselves.
Absolutely, but what we don't do is develop policies which actually compromise our own fertility rates. I just mentioned the fact.
Wait a sec. How would immigration policy affect our fertility
You
rates?
drive up housing, the price of housing, which is what immigration does. All the housing bubbles that we've seen around the world, immigration was a factor in every one of them. You drive up the price of housing, you price your young people out of the market. Young people make their decisions about when they're going to have children based on whether or not they can afford a house. So you've got that kind of thing going on. There simply are no hard and fast rules about, and there's no immigration economist who will say that there are any rules about how many people are optimal as immigrants or whatever in order to keep an economy going. It's all about wealth production, who is productive. You don't need a big number of people to do that. What you need is good synergies.
Okay, let me get Stephen on the issue of whether or not immigration affects fertility rates.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard this argument in the past about housing prices going up. I mean, you just told us the number, 0.7%. You can't tell me that by immigration our houses have gotten more expensive. I mean, with all respect, it just doesn't make sense to me, and that's a story and a theory that's been floated around whenever anyone doesn't want immigration to Canada because it becomes too expensive. We don't want people coming in.
Rizvi, I haven't heard you yet say whether you think 250,000 immigrants a year is a good number or a bad number, too high, too low. What's your thought?
I look at it from a different angle. we brought 500,000, she says, and out of them 250 came on regular immigration on point system, and nearly 242,000 they came through
Temporary workers.
And
yeah, they came through temporary workers visa, right? And my question is that when there were already 250,000 immigrants here, were they settled? Were they integrated? Did they get proper jobs? If they did not, then why did we bring another 242,000 workers again?
Steve has the answer.
Because the temporary workers are here to fill a temporary position for a year, 6 months, 2 years, and then they leave. They're helping us with our businesses, and if we didn't have them, our businesses would be in huge trouble. So they're the temporary group, and they have to meet the same pay standards that you and I would receive. So we need those people.
Okay, question from the floor, please. Hi.
Hi. Okay, I just had a question about, well, just government policy and immigration. It's a very touchy subject when you think about it. The Reform Party in 1994, I think it was branded racist for their anti-immigration policies. And isn't it the right of the people of the country to actually stand up and choose their own discourse? And to be branded a racist really removes any discourse at all, because no one wants to be a racist. I think there's a point where we have to realize that we have to ask all of Canadians whether or not we should tackle this subject. But
Well,
people
how do
want
they
to.
articulate that? Presumably through their elected officials, right?
Yes, and I mean.
In part.
Yeah, in part, but a lot of people don't vote either. I mean, that's a whole other issue. But at the same time, when you have, say, the Liberal Party who was in charge when multiculturalism kind of bloomed, how should a political party choose the destiny of an entire country? Political parties change, and what about people who didn't agree with that? Say they were a slight minority but didn't have the office.
Okay, I'm going to pluck a question out of there, which is, I think you've hit on something at the beginning of that, which was, yeah, you're into a bit of a speech there, but I'm going to get a question out of there. Don't worry. Has immigration become one of those issues that is just too politically hot to handle, and as a result is too taboo, you know, to oppose? It's very difficult to be
anyone from opposing, like, you know, anyone from Reform Party, Conservative or Liberal, like, it doesn't matter which party you're. Like, I have never heard anyone saying that I don't want to talk about immigration. In fact, more like, you know, as you said, the polls are showing, or, you know, whoever is talking about, you know, linking immigration to fertility rate, to anything. Like, you know, we're having this kind of debate all the time. So I really don't see, you know, sort of the fear of, I don't know, but it's
well, let me try this with Margaret.
Yes.
Margaret, do you get the feeling that the kind of default position in Canada these days is to be happy with the levels of immigration we have, and if you're against the way things work, you know, that's the politically incorrect position to have?
Yes, I mean, certainly that's true of the political classes who are between a rock and a hard place. When I speak to senators and MPs, what they tell me is that they agree with the general trend, with what I'm talking to them about, but they're afraid to act for fear of being branded racists or bigots or all the rest of it. Name calling, incidentally, is the last refuge of the intellectually bankrupt. This is racist is just another kind of name calling. The other side of the coin, though, for politicians is that they are that they're in an inherent kind of conflict of interest, because face it, one of the reasons we have such high numbers of immigrants is because they see immigration as a built-in, they insult immigrants by treating them as a built-in get-out-the-vote mechanism. If you've got huge numbers coming in, they tend to feel quite grateful towards the party that allowed them in, and they vote for them till kingdom come. So,
okay. Question back here, please. Hi.
Hi, on the topic of entitlement that you were saying that immigrants have, where is that entitlement? Because since I came to the country, every Canadian thought they were more entitled than me to have certain jobs. And you said Canada has 4 of the top 100 universities. If I come from one of the other 96, and if any of those 96 are ranked higher, shouldn't I get a better job?
Can I just ask you, are you not from here?
No, I'm from Bosnia.
You're from Bosnia?
Yeah.
When'd you come here?
96.
So you were a little kid at the time?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Born in Bosnia. All right, how about that? If you're from another country that actually has a higher ranking university than what we've got in this country here, should you be entitled to one of those better jobs? Rizvi, what do you say?
I don't think it is a matter of entitlement. It is the matter of your competence.
yeah.
And I'm pretty sure That here people, I mean, the selections are done on the basis of merit.
Yes. I have to say, I mean, you look eminently employable to me. I'm amazed if you're not employed.
Back here, please.
Immigrants, my question is for Margaret. Immigrants came to enhance their goals and aspirations, and not many immigrants came to just be lazy. There are those who are great and have persistence, but they found themselves marginal in a sense that they can move up from the poverty line. And some of them are here for 21 years, 30 years. I talk to a lot of people. So do you think the system needs to change the mindset of those who work in the system so people can create a more balanced approach towards immigrants?
Margaret, what do you say?
Again, it is a failure of the system. We're talking about people here who, for whatever reason, have not progressed. One assumes, again, it comes down to competencies. And if people are arriving here without basic competencies, then they're going to have a really, really rough time.
I just want to ask this lady, because that question sounded like it came out of personal experience. Are you born in Canada?
Yes.
You are born in Canada?
No, I'm not. I'm from Jamaica.
You're from Jamaica?
But I've been here 21 years.
21 years. And
Yes.
when you first came here, did you have an understanding or an expectation of what life in Canada would be like?
No, I thought it was like, you'll move up in your status and achieve your goals.
If you work hard.
Contribute towards society.
If you work hard.
If you work hard.
And
that I did.
And has it worked for you?
I go to college, university, and I'm still marginal.
Really? Why do you think you're marginalized?
I don't know. I think it's how the system is set up and the mindset of the people who controls the system.
No, but you're marginalized because you don't have the job you thought you would have by now?
Yeah, I don't have the job that I thought I would have.
And you've been to community college?
Yeah, I've been to college. I applied for many jobs.
But it hasn't happened for you in the way you thought it would?
Yeah, it hasn't happened.
Okay, I hope you don't mind those personal questions, but that helps us, I think, understand what we're talking about a little better tonight. Okay. Steve, you wanted to say?
But that's not the immigration system's fault. That's really Canadian employers that have to be educated and work with the community. And we have mentoring groups now where employers go out and try to work with new immigrants and people that are looking for jobs. So I don't really fault the immigration system for that. I think that was the employers that have to learn and become more open-minded, and we're getting better employers. But I don't think that has to do with immigration.
Does it have anything to do, let me just put it out there on the table, she's a black woman in a mostly white country. Is that a factor?
Well, in Toronto, 51% of the Canadians that are Canadian citizens weren't born here, so I don't accept that. No.
That's today. 20 years ago when she came here, that wasn't the case.
And
maybe then.
I think that does have something to do with, although I would be the first to say that I don't think any employer will be out there consciously saying that I don't want to employ someone who's black or whatever. But if you look at the stats, most of the workplaces that are most diverse are workplaces that are regulated by the federal government, subject to the Employment Equity Act at the federal level. So I think that the fact that we have legislation at the federal level that kind of brings to the service the need to have diverse workforce, make the employers in general more conscious when they are hiring people. Of course, it's based on merit, but it's also based on the fact that you want the workforce to be representative. But we don't have that at the provincial level,
Okay,
so most of the workplaces don't have that.
Less than 5 minutes to go here. Let's see if we can sneak a couple of more questions in. Hi.
Hi. Actually, speaking of employment, I was wondering what the panel's opinion is on minimum wage laws and the plight of immigrants. I guess some might say the argument goes if you didn't have such laws, companies would be able to employ more people, less skilled for lower pay, but at the same time give them an opportunity to start in a potential career and grow from there.
Let me ask Rizvi, when you first came to Canada, did you work in minimum wage jobs?
Yes.
And what did you think of the minimum wage at that time?
$6.95.
Was it adequate? No, not adequate. If it were higher, might you not, might it have been the case that you couldn't have got the job?
Yeah, I did not have any choice.
The minimum wage right now is over $10, just over $10. It's still under the poverty line. And as far as I know, the economists have looked at it. Raising minimum wage actually hasn't hasn't had the impact on the amount of or the number of jobs that are being created. So the minimum wage is there to protect workers who are in those kind of situations.
Okay, but
in reality,
Avi,
many people actually don't get minimum wage.
Avi, if you made the minimum wage $25 an hour, no one would get hired, right? So you got to find the balance somewhere. Fair to say?
Well, you have to make it livable wage. What is that? I
You're
don't
not answering
know,
my
right?
question.
Yeah.
The answer is if you made it, if it's $25 an hour, no one would get hired. It's too much, right?
When minimum wage is $25, I'm sure that the average rate is much higher by that time. So.
Okay, that's 3 times you ignored my question. But anyway, I'll let you get away with it. Everybody knows you did. Here we go. Back here, please.
Okay, regarding the idea that we're insulting immigrants by regarding them as a built-in get-out-the-vote mechanism, isn't it equally as insulting to regard them as some sort of natural resource we can turn on and turn off as we need it, except, of course, they're conveniently outside the country, so we don't have to look them in the eye when we insult them?
Okay, Margaret, you want to take that one on?
Well, I would agree entirely with that, were it not for the fact that, and we know this categorically, that your prospects of being happy in this country are absolutely compromised if you don't have a job. Having a job is job one to becoming a happy, flourishing citizen. And the alternative, and we're seeing it in many, certainly the highest risk group, namely immigrant youth, the perils of creating an underclass of people who don't work, are totally subsisting on welfare.
Okay, Margaret, I'm going to jump in because we got 1 minute left and I want to let this woman have a shot at it. Go ahead.
My question is that I think for people who are saying that there's too much immigration happening, I think one of the reasons is that the requirements to come into the country for English, for example, English language is a huge thing. And I think that for like immigrants need TOEFL, IELTS, like all of those kind of exams to prove that they have the language requirements. But I think that the language requirements are much lower than the actual working environment languages that you need. And I think that's one of the huge problems, that we put out requirements that are very low, but then the working environment standard is very high. And what would you recommend for that?
That's a great point. I've heard that from many people. Stephen, you want to finish up? We got 20 seconds for you.
The federal government has agreed with you, and they're examining right now the language requirements for people to come in. But on the other end, they've gone, in my opinion, overboard, where now they make everybody take an English language test. So if you're born in America and you were educated at MIT, worked for 20 years as a president of a company in the United States and want to come here, you have to take a language test. So they're examining all this now.
Perfect. I got that on the table just before the night was out, and I want to thank all our guests for coming here this evening to the Munk School to help us out with the first part of our discussion tonight on immigration. Margaret in particular coming all the way from Ottawa. We appreciate that. Thanks to the audience for coming out this evening as well. We're grateful you could spare some time to be with us this evening as well.